The gospel reading today, indeed all of the readings, particularly this pericope from the Gospel of St. Mark, is easily one of my very favorites for a lot of good reasons. It is jam-packed with wonder. And combined as it is today with the other two readings, it seems to me at least, very eloquently to us in the very present time, as always, the living Word does. In the first reading from the Book of Wisdom, in that very first chapter of that book, the author of the Book of Wisdom makes a very striking statement we sometimes forget, that death is not of God, nor his intent, and he takes no delight in the destruction of the living. But rather, death enters the world through the evil one, through our sin, that God intends to eradicate it, because God desires us to live and to live fully. Remember that the next time you're at a funeral and someone says, well, it was God's will, or God took them. It's not our belief, no matter how comforting it may seem, at least in a passing fashion, at the time. No, God did not intend our death, but for us to live forever. And so what the wisdom writer is setting up as we come into Capernaum and to the ministry of Jesus is that our Lord, in fact, has engaged in a very serious battle. He is at war with the forces of death. He is at war with the forces of suffering. He is teasing them out, and he is destroying them. He is on a battlefield engaged in a fight against all that would claim us and take us from the living God who loves us. So we get to that gospel. What are some of the miracles in that gospel? Name me a miracle from that gospel. There are two obvious ones. What's a miracle? Touch the hem of his garment, we used to say. New translation poorly says, touched his clothes. Touch the hem of his garment, and she becomes completely well. Here's this woman who's had this hemorrhaging, this flowing of blood for 12 years. President Obama would love this gospel because she goes to all these doctors and spends all of her money, and she has nothing left, and she's still not cured. All right, so she's there, and she says, well, I've got one last chance. The only thing that's left for this woman is her desperation. And she touches the hem of his garment, and instantaneously, she's made well. That's one healing. Healing after a flow of blood. She feels it in her body. What's the other one? What's so obvious? Huh? You remember? The little girl that died, right? The little 12-year-old girl that died. What does Jesus do to her? Brings her back to life. Exactly. And again, this powerful vignette. I don't know if you noticed it. It happened last night too. But I was reading the gospel, and that first part, you can still hear kind of the rumble of the natives a little bit, you know? But then you get to that part where he describes going in after that little girl, and everybody quiets down. It's such a visual image. It's a parent's nightmare, first of all. It's such a visual image, and the Lord reaches out and brings such goodness to what is such a horrible scene. All right? Not an infrequent scene in Jesus' day, but a horrible one even to our own. What are some of the other miracles? She touched his cloak. So. All right. One miracle is that he was aware of it. Kind of a miracle, more of our Lord's omniscience, but you're close. Remember, this is a woman who in her society is radically unclean. Her flow of blood has rendered her ritually impure every day of her life. She is a non-entity, and she's not to be amongst people. And where is she? She's in a crowd where all sorts of people are touching her. And what's more, she's touching Jesus, and the minute she touches Jesus, she renders him radically unclean. You know, the punishment for her would be extraordinary, even possibly stoning to death, because she's basically rendering the town unclean by her presence in it. But she's so desperate, she takes a chance, and she comes up clandestinely, quietly. She sneaks up. There's even a kind of language. They say that she kind of slips in as quietly as she can, keeping it all to herself, doesn't want to confront him, doesn't want to ask him for a cure. She'll just touch him, and that will be enough. And she sees her chance in the press of the crowd. Anybody who's seen pictures of Capernaum, the streets are very narrow. They're by no means as wide, nowhere near as wide as this platform. And And so when there's a crowd, you can see how they're all moving through with all the stalls on either side and people just packed together. And she sees her chance. She can get in and get out. But when she does, she immediately feels this healing. And what is healed in her? Jesus makes her come and stand before everybody, and she talks. She confesses. This is a miracle. She's given her personhood back. She becomes real again. She's no longer a non-entity. Jesus heals that person of the woundedness of her life. And do you notice what he says to her? He says to her, he says, "Woman, your faith has saved you." You notice what he said? He didn't say, "I just cured you." He didn't say, "Your flow of blood just stopped, that's a good thing." Your faith has saved you. You know, he looks into her and he sees 12 years of horror and desperation. He sees the anger that's built up at God and at the world. He sees the sadness and the despair. And he says, "Your faith has saved you." He heals inside, not just outside. Everybody else is clapping for the lack of flow of blood. But she feels in her body, in herself, that she's been made whole. She's been forgiven. The grudges she's held, the anger that's beset her, the despair that's been around her is gone. Your faith has healed you. And then they come, and there's another healing. They come and they say, "Your daughter is dead. Don't trouble the teacher any longer." And Jesus says a great line, mistranslated in my opinion in the revision of the New Lectionary, or poorly translated. The line in the original, closest to the original Greek is, "Faith is useless, what is needed is trust." Excuse me, fear is useless, what is needed is trust. He wants that person's faith. And what's a healing? There's a healing in that synagogue official where he gives his faith to Jesus. His heart-wrenching, father-felt sadness at the losing of his daughter, that he's too late, you know, is compounded by these people who say, "Leave him alone. It's all over. There's nothing else." But he listens to Jesus. Fear is useless. What is needed is trust or faith. There's another healing. He gives it to the Lord. He looks square at the Lord and says, "If you lead, I'll go. I don't care what they're saying. I don't care what the world is saying. I don't even care what my eyes or ears behold. I believe you. I'll believe what you said, no matter what." That's a healing. He gets there. They're all convinced. Of course, she is dead. They're all convinced. You've seen that, you know, in the pictures from the Mideast, that high trilling sound of the women who gather at a funeral and make that loud noise as a sign of mourning, throwing sand in the air. It's quite a commotion. You know, there's great despair, there's awfulness of death. Okay? And he tells them to stop, he puts them out, and then he walks in, and there she is, laid out. And he walks in with the mother and father, and this must have been so searing to the people of the early church. This is very interesting. So searing a memory that our Lord actually did this, that you notice what they do, they include the Aramaic words in the gospel. They remember it. It's such a big deal to the people who were there. And of course, Mark, we say, is getting his gospel from St. Peter, who was one of the participants in this whole thing.